In order to conclude our discussion on fluid shift and cardiac function, we have to incorporate a brand new system of the lymphatic system. Now, the lymphatic system we will be discussing in several contexts and coming back to it several times as we go through AMP2. It's important to realize at this point we're mostly concerned with lymphatics' role as they pertain to blood volume maintenance and fluid shift. But we will use this opportunity to introduce the lymphatic system as far as its role in blood cell formation, digestive absorption, and immune function. But in particular, once we get to immune function, we'll be coming back and implementing the lymphatic system again in its role in it. The lymphatic system, as it pertains to us right now, is going to be responsible for removing excess fluid that's escaped the cardiovascular system and returning it back into the circulatory system. When we discussed fluid volume and fluid shift across the capillary, we discussed it as a perfect system. And at this point, if you haven't watched a lecture on fluid shift, please pause this one and watch fluid shift first. We discussed blood flow going from the arterial side of the circulatory system through the capillary and out the other side into the venous system. And while the blood was in the capillary itself, that's when we had an opportunity to exchange with the tissues. We discussed blood pressure and how it forces fluid from the capillary into the tissues, carrying with it needed solutes, oxygen, glucose, that the cells in that tissue are going to need. Firstly, we talked about the return of that fluid going from the tissues back into the capillary, carrying with it waste products such as carbon dioxide. Now, again, at the time, we discussed that as being a perfect system. Fluid out equaling fluid back in. And we only really discussed imperfections in that system as they related to extenuating circumstances. We talked about hypertension, blockages on the venous side of the system, liver disease resulting in lack of albumin circulating, or vascular damage, allowing that albumin that would normally be contained within the capillary to escape out into the interstitial regions. And any of those imperfections technically could result in what we would call edema, an accumulation of fluid in the interstitial fluid. So we basically had more fluid leaving the capillary than we had return. The lymphatic system would be responsible for collecting this edema fluid, returning it by way of a network of lymphatic vessels straight back into the circulatory system. But even in the absence of edema as a result of extenuating circumstances, what we didn't tell you in the fluid shift discussion is that that system is rarely a perfect system. And in reality, only about 90% of the fluid that leaves a capillary winds up returning to that capillary. So even at the best of times, we've got 10% of that fluid being drained from the tissues by way of lymphatic vessels. While the fluid is in this lymphatic system, we have an opportunity for recognition and infection control. This is going to be a low flow rate system. And as we make our way back through the lymphatic vessels on our way to the circulatory system, we'll pass this fluid through a network of nodes inside which we see this reticular tissue form a net, allowing normal fluid as part of the lymphatic system to pass through, but catching with it any foreign invading organisms that might be present, giving us an opportunity to concentrate them for more adequate recognition. We also see the lymphatic vessels play a role in absorption, particularly fatty acids. Most things absorbed across the digestive wall do so into the circulatory system itself. Fatty substances, however, are absorbed through the columnar cells of the digestive system and into the lymphatic vessels. But to get back to what we were talking about with our present day context of fluid shift, these network of lymphatic vessels drain the body in a very particular way. And the only named vessels we're going to make you responsible for are going to be the main ones and where they wind up connecting back into the circulatory system. You'll see, based on the model in front of us here now, the body is pretty well geographically differentiated. We basically have the entire upper right quadrant of the body, right side of the head, right upper extremity, and right side of the torso, being drained by a network of lymphatic vessels that eventually converge to form the right lymphatic duct. This right lymphatic duct drains into the right subclavian vein. The rest of the body, the left head, the left torso, left upper extremity, and the entire lower body is going to be drained eventually into the thoracic duct, which eventually drains into the left subclavian vein. So you will have to know that particular part of the circulatory system and its relationship to those major lymphatic ducts. Right lymphatic duct draining the right upper part of the body, bringing lymphatic fluid to rejoin the circulatory system at the right subclavian vein. The rest of the body being drained into the thoracic duct, which eventually rejoins the circulatory system at the left subclavian vein. All the while, as we're moving through these network of lymphatic ducts, passing that fluid through networks of lymph nodes. Now, we do see these lymph nodes concentrated at different parts of the body. They're pretty well distributed, but concentrated all the same, with the major ones being the ones found into the cervical region. And with regard to these locations, even within these locations, they can be subdivided again. So we can have the anterior cervical chain lymph nodes, the posterior cervical chain lymph nodes, for example. We have lymph nodes in the axillary region, the inguinal region, pelvic, abdominal, and thoracic regions. Now, with regard to another topic that we'll bring up once we hit immune function, would be the migration of cancerous cells. Looking to the lymph nodes as this concentrating point is a good place to look for spread of cancerous cells, because we see a nice geographic drainage. Ladies with breast cancer, fluid from that part of the body tends to drain into the axillary lymph nodes. So if we are worried about metastasis and spread of those cancerous cells, we may do a biopsy of a lymph node in the axillary region and look for migration of cancer cells at that point, knowing that they left their primary location. Again, looking at that in context of a filter to concentrate even invading organisms. The spleen is going to be an organ associated with the lymphatic system. A relatively soft lobular organ containing red and white pulp. The white pulp being accumulation of white blood cells, again as part of a recognition sequence, and even lymphoid tissue for white blood cell production. But we also see red pulp, cavernous regions inside the spleen containing blood, and in particular red blood cells. The spleen is going to play a major role in ridding the blood of aged red blood cells. Red blood cells typically live and circulate throughout the body for about 120 days or so. Old, worn-out red blood cells need to be filtered from the blood and recycled in a sense. We see that happen through the spleen. We see the thymus gland as another organ associated with the lymphatic system. Thymus gland is going to be a source of lymphoid tissue for white blood cell maturation. T cell maturation in the thymus gland will then become associated with the lymphatic fluids as part of that recognition and response. But again, a topic we'll get to more so once we do immune. Thymus gland is going to be located in the chest, close to the aortic arch. We also see the lymphatic vessels associated with recognition anatomy that would be external. So tissues like the tonsils, where we may get surface recognition of a foreign invader even before it technically enters the body. Trapping things in the most notorious of pathways as it makes its way into the body, whether it be respiratory, up in the pharyngeal tonsils, digestive, orally consuming something with the palatine and the lingual tonsils. So remember, we're looking at this system as it stands right now, mostly with its role in picking up that 10% of fluid that we lose by way of an imperfect Starling-Landis fluid shift. Recognize that role and know the main ducts in which it brings back to the circulatory system, and that'll be our main objective for this particular section. Thank you.